Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the quarterfinals of Grand Prix Stockholm, the very last event of this season. And with Andre Stradsky against Luis Salvato here, there are smiles on these faces, but there is a lot on the line here, especially for Luis, because if he wins this match, he wins Player of the Year. The Argentinian gets to hold a title that has only once before been lifted by a South American, that being Paulo Vitor da Rosa last year. He's up against Andre Stradsky, though, has shown himself to be tenacious in his ability to hang on to playing at the top level. He said that he was looking at potentially taking a break from high-level Magic, but then he just keeps rattling off these wins. He's locked up gold, and Andre Stradsky right back in the thick of things here, kicking things off first with an Ether Vial, then with a Noble Hierarch. His Spirits list gets a little bit of a jump on things, and that Ether Vial even means that he could potentially get a lot of creatures in play without much that Luis can say about it.
Yeah, of course. Turn 1 Ether Vial is the start you want to have. In the best case, you actually draw exactly one of them, and then suddenly you have this incredible play of being able to drop a 2-drop, a 3-drop, another 3-drop the turn after, and there is even the advantage that you are not susceptible to counter magic.
Speaking of counter magic, Andre Stradsky has his own form of counter magic in a way here. Spell Queller gets to exile spells on the stack with a converted mana cost of 4 or less, and I kind of like using it early, getting a threat on the battlefield, but also not leaving something too scary underneath it in case it works out that later on Luis Salvato finds one of his big board sweepers.
Absolutely. This is a good use of Spell Queller because Andre wants to get the pressure going anyway. Has actually a great draw here on the play.
Yeah, that Selfless Spirit, it means that the likes of Supreme Verdict will now not be an answer to all of the creatures that he has in play. Obviously, Terminus, it doesn't destroy creatures. It puts creatures on the bottom of decks, meaning that even the indestructibility granted by Selfless Spirit, not going to be good enough there. But Stradsky here, he's got a nice Air Force to work with. He is going to be able to get in some damage early on, and that's an important feature. And look at these extra spell collars that he's got in his hand here. Between the Noble Hierarch that he has to mean that he has 3 mana and 3 counts on Ether Vial, he can stop a lot of what Luis Salvato has going on in the early stages of this game.
Absolutely. Even Supreme Verdict doesn't do anything anymore. Salvato has to find a Terminus. He's playing the full 4 copies, so that's what needs to happen here.
So Path to Exile being leveled at Spell Queller, and Ether Vial tapped in response to put in a Drogskull Captain. This the perfect answer because it gives all of the other spirits that Andre Stradsky has in play hexproof. Ideal to be able to do it that way rather than putting another Spell Queller into play, because you didn't want to create kind of a house of cards all around Spell Quellers that if they die help kill off further Spell Quellers and so on and so forth.
What a draw by Andre Stradsky.
Yeah, Jace the Mind Sculptor also being stopped by Spell Queller. This has just been a spectacular draw from the player from Czechia, and he still has yet another Spell Queller in hand, so he can potentially carry on what he's got going here. Big swings here for 3, 6, 9, 11 points of damage. I mean, this is what you spoke about, Simon, that these Spirits decks, they can put out a real clock when they need to.
Yeah, and Luis doesn't even find the Terminus, so I think he's just scooping up his cards here.
That was about the most decisive victory we've seen in any game against Luis Salvato for the entire tournament thus far. Andre Stradsky, it was a long time ago that he last lost a match in this event, and it looks like he's got no intention of making things easy on the currently 3rd-ranked player in the world, who is presumptively at least tied for first by the end of this weekend. You see these guys, they get to have a look at deck lists, and that pretty important. It means that there's full information when it comes to sideboarding. Simon, when it comes to sideboarding, what can we reasonably expect to see from these players?
So from the control side, it's actually not so easy to have a perfect configuration against Spirit simply because of how it's built. But I think what you want to have is just a little bit more interactive cards. Maybe Porphyry Nodes is a card that's really, really good. Timely Reinforcements, not so much against the Flyers, of course, much better against humans. And then that's pretty much it. Like I said, you can bring in some Dispels. Sure, that might be doing good work, but ultimately, the white-blue control deck is not really prepared to fight Banned Spirits, at least from the sideboard perspective.
And then on the other side of things with what Andre's working with, he has the potential to bring in the likes of Gaddock Teague if he wishes, some Unified Will so that he's got more counter magic of his own. It seems to me like this Bant Spirit list is pretty well set up for the expected metagame of good players trying to play blue-white control against it.
Absolutely. I love Thalia, Garden of Thraben. If that can come down on turn 2, Unified Will and Disdainful Stroke should be hard counters for Terminus, which is very important, as I mentioned. And then, of course, all the Geist of St. Trouts that you can find, you're going to put in your main deck.
So Ondřej Stráský, game 1 was relatively straightforward. Game 2 and indeed 3 potentially, it feels to me like he might have an edge in terms of sideboarding. If you're Seth Manfield watching this is all good news, because as things currently stand, if it works out that Ondřej Stráský wins this round, then we will end up with 2 players on the exact same pro points total. Now, in principle, in other circumstances for other kinds of races, what that might mean is that we figure out some sort of a tiebreaker. But you know what? Where's the drama in that? There's something a little bit more exciting that we seem to have, more specifically just for Player of the Year, which is a playoff. It's only ever happened once before. That was Brad Nelson against Guillaume Matignon quite a while ago now. We won't worry about formats for now. That's all kind of got to be figured out based on whether or not we even have a tie. For that even to happen, though, Luis Salvato, he's going to have to win 2 games on the bounce. Let's have a look at some deck lists. So here is that Bant Spirits list in total for those of you that are kind of catching up, making sure that you understand everything that's going on here. And a lot of cards in this sideboard that seem pretty decent. I guess that one question for you, Simon, is if you're bringing in quite a few cards potentially, where's there room to make little cuts?
Yeah, let's take a look. I mean, the most impactful cards, I would say, are Spell Queller. I like that card a lot to deal with Supreme Verdict, but also to prevent Jace from coming down. Path to Exile is the easiest card. You don't want a Path to Exile in your sideboarded games. I believe there is a single Lyra in Luis Salvato's deck, but I wouldn't keep my Path to Exiles in there just for that, especially if you bring in counter magic.
All right, and let's have a look on the other side of things just to make sure that we've not missed anything with regards to what Luis Salvato is working with. It seems to me like this is a deck that, because it has a number of one-offs, there might be room to shave some of them off just as a sort of from the get-go. And then there's the option of creatures, but to be perfectly honest, I'm not quite sure that any of the cards that Luis Salvato is bringing in are quite as decisive as what we see from Ondřej Stráský.
We will see. Like I said, I really like the Porphyry nodes. I think Vendilion Click is great because it at least threatens to trade with Flying Spirit. And there are a bunch of cards that you don't really want. I think Crucible of Worlds is the easiest cut. Spell Snare, I'm not sure about. Then the draws with Aether Vial are always problematic. And let's talk about the Planeswalkers as well. Jace the Mind Sculptor and Teferi are best when they're not opposed. But the Bant Spirit decks are always going to have the creature advantage over you. So maybe shaving some of those Planeswalkers is actually the way to go. And suddenly those Angels, those 5/5s, look better all of a sudden. So basically what I want to say is, even though there are some answers to Baneslayer Angel that really punish you for tapping out for it, the matchup is not that great and you're down a game. I would maybe call Lyra Dawnbringer and Baneslayer Angel to the party.
Yeah, it may be that when your opponent's got an Air Force that you need to find some top guns of your own. So it's interesting. It looks like the primary win condition of the blue-white deck might have to see a substantial change here in these subsequent games. I've got to say, based on how Game 1 went, I feel like this is going to be a rough one for our Argentinian who's travelled all the way across here.
It doesn't look great, I agree. And once again, Terminus is the answer that Luis is looking for. And not in his opening hand, but he wants to miracle it when there are 2-3 creatures on the other side, because that really takes the steam out of the Bant Spirits deck.
Now, it looks like Stráský here doesn't have quite the same explosive sort of hand that he had in Game 1, where there was an easy Aether Vial as the turn 1 play. He's got a Noble Hierarch in there. He's also got Mausoleum Wanderer. He's got a few good options in terms of what he might potentially cast on the first turn. So just having a little think about how he wants to do things. Cracks a Flooded Strand, saves a little bit of time and says, I'm going to be playing this Mausoleum Wanderer, and then ultimately shows the Hallowed Fountain that was able to achieve that.
Yeah, and I think his alternative was a Noble Hierarch, so really a tricky spot here. And you can see that Luis is holding, or just drew Lyra Dawnbringer. So the Angels are in the deck after sideboarding.
So an early oust here on that Mausoleum Wanderer. Luis Salvato, no interest in letting that one hang around. And all of the life that was spent so carefully on that fetch land into Hallowed Fountain immediately returned to Andre Strasky, who has Botanical Sanctum on the second turn for a Noble Hierarch and indeed a pass.
Oh, and had he started with the Noble Hierarch, well, then Luis probably would have ousted that, but there was the theoretical chance of a turn to Geist of St. Traft there.
Yeah, Geist of St. Traft with its hexproof, a bit of a problem for the blue-white control deck. I mean, there are a few creatures that can potentially jump in the way of it at instant speed, but those creatures are in pretty high demand for a variety of reasons already.
Yeah, and you can see Luis's hand. Luis is definitely happy about the fact that there's no Ether Vial like in game one. That is just a tricky card to deal with when you're playing control.
So along comes another Mausoleum Wanderer, and off Horizon Canopy, enough mana to cast Geist of St. Traft. No responses by the looks of things from Luis Salvato to those two. And Field of Ruin deals with Horizon Canopy before it can potentially get cashed in for a card. In terms of the basic lands available to the Spirits list, it's not running loads of them. It's got one each of Forest, Mountain, and Plains.
That sounds like a sufficient amount for this kind of deck. Luis fetching the island here to enable Cryptic Command. Ooh, and there's the Terminus.
Terminus, a big deal there. You see Andre Strasky sacrificing Mausoleum Wanderer, forcing at least for Luis to pay an additional mana in order to be able to cast that Terminus, meaning that there won't be too much extra going on. But also importantly, though, Luis Salvato did not play a land that turn.
Yeah, very important fact. Also, he doesn't have double white yet for this Supreme Verdict he just drew.
The Supreme Verdict, it is a good one, as and when he can actually cast it. But even the uncounterability of it gets trumped in turn by the way that Spell Queller works. Because Spell Queller doesn't counter spells, it exiles them from the stack. That a crucial difference, meaning that even the uncounterability clause is ultimately not going to be good enough here.
Exactly.
Cavern of Souls, the pickup. That just a one-of in Andre Strasky's deck, but it makes all of his spirits just that much more powerful. Now, somehow or other, the control deck has to face down a deck that has uncounterable ways of countering spells. So along comes Geist of St. Traft. Opt from Luis Salvato. He finds himself a Search for Azcanta and does end up deploying it. So shields down for him, but to be honest, with Cavern of Souls in play, there's an argument to say that those shields were already being cast aside. And Andre Strasky, he's going to be able to get a big hit in here with this Geist of St. Traft. So Strasky, he's the one with mana to work with. He's the one that can potentially push the tempo of this game just a little bit. Plays a Noble Hierarch. Attacks for a full 7 points of damage there.
Yeah, the way this works is you put the Angel trigger on the stack and then the Noble Hierarch trigger. Noble Hierarch sees only the Geist of St. Traft attacking, so you end up with 7 points of power.
And Luis Salvato, he does find a path to exile here, but the only thing that he can target with it is Noble Hierarch. And to be perfectly honest, Andre Strasky's already got a lot of lands to work with. Tough spot for the Argentinian. The number 3 next to his name, presumptively a number 1 here. It's just a matter of whether or not that's a tie or a clean rating in terms of his ranking within the world. And Salvato there just having to discard. This has been an unfortunate set of draws for the Argentinian, as Andre Strasky putting on a bit of a clinic here.
Yeah, I really like how Andre has played this. Not really rushing with any of his cards. Just saying, look, I have this Geist of St. Traft. I don't need to play anything else. I'm sitting here with my counter magic, with my spell crawlers, and the one thing you have time for to do to answer this Geist of Saint draft, I'm going to counter. Wow.
Terminus off the top. This is a card that cannot be stopped by Spell Queller, because even though the miracle cost is 1, the converted mana cost of this mass removal spell is a full 6. And that enough to make it a little bit trickier to stop. I believe that there might be a disdainful stroke in hand for Andre Stradsky. Will this be good enough, or is there counter magic back for Luis Salvato? There is! All right. And Spell Queller now has found a spell that it can stop. Is there any more from Luis Salvato? Because that Spell Queller cast with a Cavern of Souls, no, it cannot be stopped. And that means, Simon Gertzen, we are going to have a playoff for our Player of the Year, because Luis Salvato, he did so much great work to make it into this top 8, but ultimately he found himself up against stiff competition in the form of Andre Stradsky. He will have to satisfy himself with having done just enough to force that playoff with Seth Manfield. We'll get a chance to speak to Seth at the World Championships later on this week. Of course, Luis Salvato will be there too, and there will be the playoff set up. Stay tuned, because the story of Player of the Year for 2018 is not over. Big smiles there for Andre Stradsky. He came into this event thinking it was going to be his last tournament. He's now locked up gold, and potentially he could win this entire show. He could find himself with another trophy for his mantelpiece. Fantastic performance from Andre Stradsky, going through to the semi-finals, defeating the man who yesterday was undefeatable. Today, it seemed like he was going to take some stopping. Ultimately, though, Andre Stradsky, congratulations to him, still in the race. And you can see there that in our feature match area, the other 2 matches we got under cameras, they're still shuffling up. We're not missing any magic, but just as soon as one or other of these matches kicks off, we will get a chance to jump in and see how they're going. So, to remind you guys of the other matches that we have going on in our feature match area, because that one, ultimately, a pretty quick one. Elias Clocker, he's up against Oliver Moon. Oliver Moon also on Bant Spirits, a popular choice for this weekend, but Elias Clocker, the one player with 3 buys, playing Mono White Martyr, a very different deck from a lot of what is being used by the rest of the field. And you know what? It's had a little bit of success online, and this might be the place where it picks up a trophy. We have Joel Larsen, you can see him there on camera, playing against his countryman Rasmus Enegren. They are both on blue-white control. Finally, we have Jari Rench and Branko Nerink. They are on Storm versus Jeskai control.
Yep. Storm is a matchup that control doesn't really want to face. Might be a bit better if you're Jeskai, because you have all these burn elements, but definitely a tricky matchup.
So we're going to be looking into Elias Clocker versus Oliver Moon. Oliver Moon having picked up his game 1 with Bant Spirits against Mono White Martyr, but now on a mulligan, so going down to, well, at most 6 cards. And the Mono White Martyr list, it's a really interesting one in terms of the way that it plays things out, because one of the things that it's got going on is it has access to potentially massive life gain with the likes of Martyr of Sands, but then it can also kind of, it can have aggro rolls where it starts getting a Serra Ascendant and pumping that up large very quickly. It can also play a kind of more of a control role with the likes of Ranger of Eos.
Yeah, and one of the cards that makes this deck tick is Squadron Hawk, because it means that you just get so many white cards in your hand from Martyr of Sands, but also you have this element of recursion with Mistveil Plains and Emeria the Sky Ruin. You actually generate a ton of value playing Mono White Martyr, which means that this deck is a lot more difficult than just slamming Serra Ascendants and Martyr of Sands in the early turns and taking down games this way.
We have seen it happen. It is within the range of this deck, but typically speaking, this is not a deck that is all about the first 2 or 3 turns. It can play the long game very, very well indeed. Meanwhile, Oliver Moon, he's on a mulligan to 5, and that Scry, he's ultimately decided to leave on top. Looks like his 5-card hand pretty decent. On the other side of things, Elias Clocker kicking things off with Mistveil Plains. Mistveil Plains, an unusual card from Shadowmoor. It is a Plains, but it is not a basic land, because it does have an additional ability. It comes into play tapped. If you have 2 or more white permanents, then you can pay some mana and take a card from your graveyard, put it on the bottom of your deck. And that's pretty useful if it means that you're getting to do things like recycling Squadron Hawk.
Yeah, that's the main thing you do with the Mistveil Plains.
So, Noble Hierarch on turn 1. Flagstones of Trocaire means that Squadron Hawk gets to come down on turn 2 for Elias, and he will fetch Well, it looks like he's got some mismatched Squadron Hawks. We won't hold that against him, though, because they still get to search up their friends just as well as any other and make sure that Clocker finishes his turn with a full 7 in his grip.
Elias Clocker, by the way, the second player in the top 8 with the main deck Crucible of Worlds.
Yeah, Crucible of Worlds was in the deck of Luis Salvato, and we saw it do great work against control. There are these neat ways of getting rid of non-basic lands, or indeed even basics with the likes of Ghost Quarter, and gradually running your opponent out of lands. And I would guess that, in some respects, in that regard, Elias Clocker with a similar plan to Salvato, if it gets to the really late game, he can make sure that he's got a big land advantage.
4 Field of Ruin, 4 Ghost Quarter.
Wow, he can much more reliably get that plan on even than we could see from Salvato. On the other side of things, though, Supreme Phantom and Mausoleum Wanderer coming along for Oliver Moon here. He is building up his Air Force very nicely indeed. And in some respects, it's unusual that he finds himself with an opponent here who actually has flyers that might be able to tussle with some of these spirits.
Yeah, of course, the 1/1 Squadron Hawk not really enough right now, but there could be more joining.
If a Serra Ascendant actually ascends, then it's almost always the biggest flyer in play.
Yeah, but the amount of pressure that Bun Spirits puts on makes it difficult for Elias to stay at a high life total.
Martyr of Sands here. An important piece of the Mono White Martyr puzzle. There's a reason that we put it in the name of the deck. 1 mana 1/1 that you can pay 1 mana, sacrifice it, and reveal any number of white cards in your hand. For each white card that you reveal that way, you gain 3 life. And that's an absolutely huge delta. You get to just get so much additional life from your 1 mana creature, and when you can potentially get it back with Proclamation of Rebirth, you find yourself with a pretty reasonable engine at fighting a lot of aggro decks.
Yeah, we will probably see that right here. We know that Clocker has 2 more Squadron Hawks in hand, and we will see all of his white cards here, which is nice.
So what do we have going on? Path to Exile, Squadron Hawk, Day of Judgment, and Ranger of Eos here. So a lot of ways of making sure that either the board is full of his creatures so that he can do his thing, or that he can get rid of all the creatures on the opposing side of the battlefield. Now, Mausoleum Wanderer does mean that resolving that Day of Judgment might be a little bit trickier, but there's already a Path to Exile to potentially deal with that. Elias Clocker has drawn a lot of non-basics for his mono-white deck thus far. A couple of copies of Mistveil Plains and that Flagstones of Trocare so far, but he does have an unglued Plains on turn 4 to mean that he's going to be able to, if he wants to, deploy the likes of Ranger of Eos. Ranger of Eos, the 3/2 that gets to search up 2 1-mana creatures. There's a response, though. Oliver Moon has a Collected Company looking in his top 6 for some good creatures to put into play himself.
Yeah, this was an absolutely crucial Collected Company, because if Oliver Moon hits Spellqueller, he's in great shape. The fact that he only hit a single Spirit and that Gaddock Teeg, which isn't doing all that much, is not good news for him.
Nonetheless, I mean, if he needs to get down Elias from this gigantic life total, just getting lots of creatures on the battlefield is certainly a way of advancing that agenda. And now the Ranger of Eos, with the information of those extra creatures, gets to decide which 1-drop creatures are going to be the appropriate additions. I like some of the utility 1-drops in here. Walking Ballista does qualify, and then in deck it has a converted mana cost of 0 that is searchable by the Ranger of Eos. And I like Cameo of False Hope as an option for this deck, because between Cameo of False Hope and Emeria the Sky Ruin, if you get to a really late game, you can set up a situation where each and every turn your opponent can't deal combat damage.
Yep, especially against a deck like Spirits, which can't really disrupt that kind of loop.
So we see another Martyr of Sands and the Walking Ballista. Range of Eos, of course, meaning that if Mistveil Plains is putting cards on the bottom of the deck, they can just get searched right on back up again. Just lands in hand here for Oliver Moon. He's going to have to work with what he currently has.
You see Oliver here not exposing Gaddock Teeg in combat, because it is stopping Day of Judgment. It's not stopping Walking Ballista. It only stops non-creature spells that have converted mana cost 4 or more, or an X in their casting cost.
Yeah, Gaddock Teeg, fine with the creatures, not so much with everything else.
Yeah, it doesn't like cryptic commands and Day of Judgments very much.
I mean, would you?
I do. I have no problem with those getting cast.
All right, so Elias Clocker here, he's got a couple of lands to choose from, both of which can potentially deal with one of the non-basics on the other side of the battlefield. Not too many basic lands in Bant Spirits. Walking Ballista for 2 here. Now that Supreme Phantom means that the 2 damage threatened by Walking Ballista isn't going to kill too terribly much.
True, but also Elias is not under a ton of pressure. He has all this life to work with. Okay, maybe the clock is going to increase a little bit, but Phantasmal Image is actually pretty bad against Walking Ballista.
I presume that the clock, by which you do not mean Elias Clocker. That's not his nickname.
The Clocker? No.
The Clock is a pretty badass nickname. I could deal with that one. As things stand, though, Oliver Moon, what can he add to his board here? Oh, it's a nice one. Phantasmal Image. I guess that the one concern here is that he knows that there's Path to Exile in Elias Clocker's hand from that early Martyr of Sands, and there's not going to be much that he can do to stop the 1-mana spell from dealing with specifically the Phantasmal Image.
Well, the problem here is that Walking Ballista just deals with it because of its downside.
I guess as things stand, though, copying Ranger of Eos a really good choice because it means that Oliver still gets to deploy a couple of copies of Mausoleum Wanderer here.
Yeah, and if he, for example, if he copies the Supreme Phantom, we would just see the Walking Ballista ping the Phantasmal Image for 1, and that's that. This is probably the most amount of damage that Oliver can get out of this Phantasmal Image.
I like it. Heads up play on his part. Each Mausoleum Wanderer, as any spirit comes into play, pumping the earlier spirits. So this a sizable attack coming across here.
I think the most important part is that the Mausoleum Wanderers are stopping all kinds of interaction by Clocker. If Clocker goes for Path, it gets countered. If Clocker goes for a Day of Judgment, it gets countered. And at the same time, they are really big attackers.
So Selfless Spirit seeing a Squadron Hawk in front of it. Of course, the Selfless Spirit currently a 3-2 thanks to the Supreme Phantom, so it won't die. Meanwhile, the Mausoleum Wanderer getting in for a lot of damage here because 2 more spirits came into play this turn. That makes it a 3-3. +1/+1 from Supreme Phantom, a 4-4. And now, post-combat, the Walking Ballista is going to target that Selfless Spirit.
Yep. Clocker wants to keep the Ballista around. And as long as Selfless Spirit is in play, he doesn't really get to do much else anyway.
Ghost Quarter and Field of Ruin now for Elias Clocker. If he wants to, he can start doing a number on those lands on the other side of the battlefield.
Yeah, I don't think the lands on the other side of the battlefield are his main concern here.
Yeah, if anything, they're the least threatening thing that's going on because there are a lot of creatures in play for this Bant Spirits list right now. It's one of those things that sometimes you talk about overextension. Because of all those Mausoleum Wanderers, it's quite difficult for Elias to resolve a way of punishing putting that many creatures onto the battlefield. Walking Ballista getting charged up just a little bit, and then a Martyr of Sands.
Yep, taking things slow. I like it. Clocker understands that this Walking Ballista is his path to victory. If he gets it up to 3, suddenly there is a chance for him to deal with the one lord, the one spirit lord on the other side of the table. Maybe even get it up even further, and then you deal with the Phantom and all the other problematic permanents.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that one of the kind of scary things about gradually spending points from a Walking Ballista to kill off a Supreme Phantom is if a Rattle Change did get flashed in partway through, that would be unfortunate. But here we see Martyr of Sands getting activated for the second time this game. 5 cards being revealed. That's another 15 life. Really, really tough on these beatdown decks actually getting any kind of purchase when they have to deal 50 damage rather than just 20.
And you can see how Clocker is managing this. He's picking off things here and there, but because he has all this life gain, he can take a much more conservative approach than any other deck in the format, really. If you had been under so much pressure with from Banned Spirits, it would have been really difficult to get there.
So Oliver Moon there just asking for the full text on Proclamation of Rebirth. I believe that one might have been in a different language than he speaks. Proclamation of Rebirth, it's an unusual one in as much as a large proportion of the time, Elias Clocker will not be looking to actually cast it so much as forecast it. The forecast ability on it lets you uncounterably return a 1-cost creature from your graveyard.
Yep, and that's huge against a Mausoleum Wanderer as well. So once Clocker really has those 7-8 mana available, that could be a way to close out the game.
So another copy of Noble Hierarch coming down now. Not the most impactful addition, but it looks like Oliver Moon content to just widen his board out just a little bit.
Clocker would like to just draw lands, but I think he drew another mass removal spell, not what he wanted to see.
Bizarrely, considering the amount of creatures in play on the other side of the battlefield. Unfortunately, between Gadok Teague, 3 different Mausoleum Wanderers there, very, very difficult for him to resolve mass removal. If anything, he'd much rather have pinpoint removal here. Ranger of Eos getting stuck in here.
Aggressive.
I mean, I guess Gadok Teague's not blocking. Maybe a Hierarch jumps under the bus. You got to get some damage in somewhere.
Well, depends on your game plan. If you're just playing the control game, you don't need any attacks at all. You can just go for blocking. So for me, this is actually a sign that Clocker might not feel as confident as I was thinking.
So what is the follow-up to this attack? Path to Exile targeting Supreme Phantom.
Yeah, and this is the big issue now for Moon. Losing the only Lord on the battlefield means that these Mausoleum Wanderers are just going to drop like flies.
Yeah, easily shot down with Walking Ballista. Difficult to protect them in any meaningful way. And the shield's down for Oliver Moon. He's got no cards in hand, so it's not as if Elias Clocker needs to play around quite as much here. Again, Walking Ballista getting charged up. Now, is there value in shooting down Mausoleum Wanderers sooner rather than later?
There's a little bit of that with cards like Collected Company and Spell Queller, but I don't think it really matters in this particular spot.
It just feels to me like doing it there where you know your opponent has no cards in hand means that you're that much safer from, say, a flashed-in Rattle Chains or similar.
I agree, but I think if, for example, if there's a flashed-in Rattle Chains, you are probably winning this game anyway, because the Ballista is still extremely dominant on this battlefield.
All right, Oliver attacking in. 1 Mausoleum Wanderer killed off. And once the first one dies, it has to feel that much safer to potentially deal with a second, or even indeed that Ranger of Eos. And a 3rd Martyr of Sands, I believe, was the pickup there. Thus far, no interest in forecasting. 6 mana. It's not a cheap forecast, but it's very potent.
He has a Walking Ballista that is doing tremendous work, so understandably, he prefers that activation.
Squadron Hawk, the play here post-combat. Just 1 additional copy to fetch up, but worth noting that there is Mistveil Plains, a couple of copies of that in play, meaning that Clocker, he has a strong interest in keeping 1 remaining Squadron Hawk in hand. The Squadron Hawks that he has knocking around, if they die, he can put them back on the bottom of his deck, search them all up again.
Now we have this kind of spot where there's a Moorland Haunt for Oliver Moon, and suddenly the Mausoleum Wanderers are threatening to become 2/2s at instant speed.
Yeah, Mausoleum Haunt, one of those cards that it can provide some persistent source of advantage, though it does still need creatures in the graveyard to transform into spirits, or in this case, just reimagine as slightly different spirits, I suppose.
I would like to see Clocker just shoot down that Phantasmal Image. I don't think he needs to take any additional damage. He, of course, knows this Matter of Sands deck much better than I do, but he's so far ahead that I think he can afford to trade a single +1/+1 counter for 5 damage.
So Wrath of God was the pickup there for Elias Clocker. He has an Invocation version of that in his list. Hence the kind of gold border.
Getting a bit flooded with the Wrath of God effects.
Yeah, Gadok Teague, he cares not for these things. And Oliver Moon still just taking those hits from that Ranger of Eos.
Or not. Yeah, it's really weird to me. It shouldn't really happen that both players are attacking with their Ranger of Eoses, and it's a fine position for both. So I'm thinking that Elias is probably exploiting the fact that it's really difficult to play against this Martyr of Sands deck correctly, because he's getting in damage, but Oliver feels that he can't ever be on the defense and start blocking a Ranger here, or trading with a Ranger.
So the Field of Ruin does deal with Moorland Haunt. That one of the higher utility lands available to Oliver Moon in this matchup. And this Walking Ballista will not be denied, now up to being a 4/4. I mean, it's a pretty high cost for mana to put a counter on the Walking Ballista, but when your opponent has lots of creatures that are so easily taken down by it, just that consistent source of damage has proven excellent here.
Absolutely. Now, if Oliver Moon doesn't draw a Collected Company and gets 2 Hexproof Lords, I think that Elias has locked up this game.
Yeah, as we mentioned at the top of this round, the mono-white Martyr list, while it has the potential for very explosive early game, really where it gets interesting is its ability to grind out longer games. So only needing a single point of damage to kill off that Phantasmal Image, even though it's copying Ranger of Eos, thanks to the fact that it's got the illusory ability. As soon as it gets targeted with an ability, it has to get sacrificed. If you look too hard at the Phantasmal Image, it just sort of fades away. And all right, now we have Path to Exile on Gadok Teague. This the kind of card that if Oliver can stop it, he might well be advised to. And Unified Will, there are enough creatures on the battlefield at the moment for this to appear to be a hard counter, but is this something that Elias could potentially stop?
Yes, he can.
Uh-oh. So at the moment there are still more, it's the same number of creatures now on both sides, meaning that Unified Will no longer works as a counterspell for this Path to Exile.
Yep. Nice. That's asserting dominance. Elias Clocker, handful, Walking Ballista still on the table, winning the race easily.
Squadron Hawk and Spirit trading off, but you know what? That Squadron Hawk, it can come back relatively easily. We need to get another white permanent in place so those Mistveil planes get active, but that not too big an ask for this mono white list.
Yeah, I don't know how many Collected Companies Oliver needs to draw in a row here.
Yeah, one is not enough at this point, which is saying something. Supreme Phantom coming down, but no friends to pump up there. Lonely Phantom, if you ask me.
Time to chump block, I think.
Oh, look at this. Oliver Moon picks up his pen on that attack and then thinks better of it, does throw Noble Hierarch in the way. Oliver Moon at a virtual 5 life. And that, a cast of Proclamation of Rebirth to get a couple of copies of Martyr of Sands back, and Oliver Moon's seen enough. We're going to be going to a game 3 here. It turns out that in this top 8, these Bant Spirit lists not completely undefeatable, in spite of what we saw in the first quarterfinals between Ondrej Stratsky and Luis Salvato. Stratsky very handily dispatching the Argentinian, forcing what will be a super climactic end to the Player of the Year race, because it will be Luis Salvato and Seth Manfield having a big match to determine who is Player of the Year in a playoff at a later date. We're going to get a chance to have a look at the deck lists of Elias Klucker and Oliver Moon as they figure out their last little bits of sideboarding. Worth noting that was a sideboarded game, so they had already made some spot adjustments. Garrock Teague, for example, I can't imagine being a main deck card for Oliver Moon's list. But we're going to start things off by looking at Mono White Martyr here. In terms of playing against the likes of Spirits, are there too many things that really need to be changed here?
Let's see. The main game plan looks really good. Making this life advantage and then just trying to control the board. We've actually seen the sideboarding of Elias in effect. More mass removal and then just a few cards going out. Crucible of Worlds for sure. Maybe some of the one-offs over there. Archangel Avacyn actually seems pretty good. I'm not so sure about Ruined Halo. Did Elias show any Sarah Ascendants in that game?
I think that he had one at the very end that he never got around to casting.
Okay, so I don't think you need all 4 of them, because in the games that you're losing, you're actually under a lot of pressure early on. So maybe that's something where you can cut one. You also don't need all 4 Thraben Inspectors, because ground creatures are actually not valuable against Spirits, or not that valuable against Spirits.
Yeah, I mean, the Spirits deck, having access to all those flyers, one of the key features that means that some people have been referring to it as the better humans deck, i.e. the tribal deck that just gets to also be disruptive, also gets to have synergistic, powerful creatures. A different type of disruption, but that Air Force a little bit harder to deny. And let's have a look at that list in some more detail here. So not wildly different to what we saw from the likes of Ondrej Stratsky. It's still got its Ether Vials. It's still got that package of various spirits and Collected Company. When we look at the sideboard, we saw Unified Will ultimately getting stymied a little bit. I'm not sure how good Unified Will is in this specific matchup, because the mono white list does have a lot of creatures.
It does, so that actually didn't work out well for Oliver Moon. I understand the appeal of Unified Will. Maybe it's actually better to try to go for something like Thalia, just more aggression that also stops a lot of the spells in the mono white deck. But ultimately, you don't have that much working in your favor, I think. You can always try to get people with Rest in Peace. Any deck that relies on the graveyard is a little bit soft to it. Now, mono white Rattrap, clearly not a graveyard deck, but it does at some point assemble this kind of graveyard recursion that you just can't beat.
All right, so these guys drawing their opening 7s, understandably sideboarding not taking quite so long for game 3, as they had already done much of the good thought that we were getting involved with here after their game 1. And it will be Oliver Moon on the play here, and he does have the turn 1 Noble Hierarch, albeit a somewhat painful one coming as it does from that Horizon Canopy. Thraben Inspector on the other side of things. This is a card that we thought that potentially could get cut there, not as impactful, but the one drop that does come with a clue, still relatively solid. And Misty Rainforest here, meaning that Oliver Moon not going to be missing any of his land drops anytime soon. So, quick update for you guys wondering about how some of the other matches have been going. Joel Larsen has won his blue-white control mirror against his countryman Rasmus Enegren. He is going to be advancing through. He won 2 games to 1, so he'll be playing the winner of Jari Rench and Branko Nerink. That is Storm versus Jeskai Control. On the other side of things, whoever wins this one will be up against Ondrej Stratsky, who at some point middle of the day yesterday decided that he just wasn't going to lose any more matches, and thus far has not done so. So Supreme Phantom already in play alongside Mausoleum Wanderer for Oliver Moon. That kind of where he wants to be, and just a Squadron Hawk early doors here from Elias Klocker. Now, if you're playing the Martyr list and you have a Martyr of Sands, it's kind of my assumption that you end up playing it almost as the first card from your hand because it gives you the most opportunity to gain a lot of life.
Absolutely, unless you're playing against a deck with a lot of spot removal. So if you're playing against Burn, you're not going to just expose it to a Searing Blaze, of course.
I mean, I suppose that right here getting more Squadron Hawks might increase the number of white cards in hand such that it's still interesting to sequence things that way. We'll figure out soon enough whether or not Elias Clocker is really working with 20 life or something closer to 40.
Oliver Moon has not seen many of his Drogskol captains. Giving his creatures hexproof would be a big step forward. Would actually make it much easier to only sit there and counter mass removal while getting in for huge points of damage.
As things stand here, he cracks his Misty Rainforest. He's wary of the type of land destruction available to Elias Clocker, so only fetches a basic forest here. And he's got a Phantasmal Image in hand, meaning that he can double up on Supreme Phantoms if he so wishes. So we now have a 4/4 Mausoleum Wanderer and a 2-powered Supreme Phantom coming in here. Pretty sizable hit coming across, and Squadron Hawk a little more than a speed bump against that.
Yep, this is the kind of game that the Banned Spirits deck wants to play.
Even the mana available to do Gadok Teague post-combat here. So Gadok Teague means that the more expensive spells can be difficult to cast, and that Mausoleum Wanderer, it can counter instants and sorceries pretty easily here because it's currently a 3/3. Sacrifice it, your opponent has to pay 3 more for an instant or sorcery. A mana leak that's also attacking Elias Clocker for a sizable amount.
Tricky spot for the Maturer deck, but if there's one deck that can stay alive longer than you would think, it's definitely this one.
There is a Path to Exile in hand, and one interesting target for it is the Phantasmal Image, because even with Mausoleum Wanderer's ability to counter spells, the ability of Phantasmal Image would mean that if it was merely targeted by Path to Exile, that would be good enough. And there wouldn't even be any land searching involved.
Yeah, and you can even crack the clue. I was actually thinking of using Field of Ruin to improve the white mana situation, but Elias just wants to find a land. Cracking that clue, casting Path sound like very useful things to do. Even the top deck Spell Queller is not going to protect the Phantasmal Image.
Everybody coming in here against Elias Clocker. Oliver Moon looking to get his damage in where he can. First the clue gets cracked.
Terminus? No.
That was a Wrath of God that got picked up, so not far off, though far enough off that it's probably not going to be relevant just for now.
Yeah. So if Elias wants to have a shot at resolving one of these mass removals, he needs to deal with the Gadok Teague and the Mausoleum Wanderer, but that's so unlikely that he first is going to stop the pressure or release the pressure a little bit so that he can maybe gain some additional life, play some chump blockers, just your classical mono-white Maturer game plan.
Clocker here, hit down to 13 on that attack, 5 damage coming through. Even the Gadok Teague getting to get involved in the Fracas, which is a little bit unusual for the Kithkin legend.
But if Clocker doesn't have lands, what is he going to do? He can only cast a single white spell each turn.
Yeah, there are other circumstances where you can do clever things with Ghost Quarter to fix your mana, but to be perfectly honest, you can't afford to be going down on number of lands. Really, that's kind of his main concern, more even than the fact that he's not got very many white sources. An interesting one coming down there.
So I believe what happened there was that Elias said, I have 8 cards in hand, I want to go to my discard. And Oliver Moon fetched with Windswept Heath in response, which allowed Elias to sneak in that Avon Mind Sensor. Ultimately not really working out, but if Oliver gets a non-basic land here, Elias has a target for Field of Ruin to potentially fix his mana.
Well, looks like Oliver it may be that that's not quite the reason that he's fetching these. It may be partly that he wants to protect his own mana base. But one way or another, this working out rather nicely for Moon here. He gets to continue to build his board. He's got plenty of spirits to be attacking with here. And there's that Drogskull captain that we were talking about earlier on. Now he gets to swing in for an awful lot here. 2 different lords pumping up those spirits. So Maelstrom Wanderer right now, it's a 4-4. The Supreme Phantom is attacking for 2. So we're at 6. Then it's a further 4 coming in from Spellqueller for 10. 12 damage coming through here. Technically, this Thraben Inspector doesn't have to block the Gadok Teeg here, but the life totals are not in Elias Klocker's favor. He needs to find a Martyr of Sands fast.
Yep, these disruptive elements of the Banned Spirits deck really make it look powerful. We saw Luis Salvato go down with white-blue control. It's not looking good for Elias Klocker. These two Banned Spirit decks might be in a mirror match in the semifinals.
So Klocker has found a land in the form of a Mistveil Plains, but while it is a Plains, not a basic Plains, and does not come into play untapped, and that will hurt quite a bit here for Elias Klocker. There's the handshake. Oliver Moon picking up the win there. He will be advancing to our semi-final. We have an all-Bant Spirits semi-final on the bottom half of the bracket. Oliver Moon up against Andre Strasky. We already have Joel Larsen with his blue-white control, the lone remaining blue-white control player in this top 8. And to figure out who's he's going to be playing, well, we're going to have to jump across to the one table where there's still a whole bunch of action going on, that being Jari Rensch. He is up against Branko Nerink. The matchup, Storm versus Jeskai Control. We can see here that we have a Storm counter beginning to go up for Rensch here. He's already a game down, so he's going to need to get something big happening here. Desperate Ritual spliced onto Desperate Ritual. Now a Past in Flames. One has to think that this looks pretty good in game 2 for Jari.
It does, and he's going for the combo kill without a mana creature in play. Might have even boarded them out. We will see about that. But here, Jari is trying to go for basically recasting all of his graveyard.
I mean, it looks like to me there's already been a Surgical Extraction, and I think I can see Baral, Chief of Compliance, as being the card being removed. Definitely makes life a lot harder for the Storm deck, but we will find out how close to impossible it is. Disdainful Stroke coming along on Past in Flames. That puts a pretty severe crimp on Yari's mana here, because it does mean that he's going to have to spend quite a bit more of it if he's going to get access to all of those cards in his graveyard.
True, but don't underestimate the resiliency of this Storm deck. Now, Rensch can flashback Past in Flames, but doesn't Nerink have another counter? I think he's just holding. He's just sitting there with his Surgical Extraction. So hoping maybe that Rensch makes another game action that allows him to Surgical the Past in Flames. I think that would be tremendous for him. If Rensch, however, spends the 3 red and 2 of his lands to flashback Past in Flames, then Rensch has to hope that his okay, this is surprising to me. Sorry, the line that Rensch is choosing is to just cast 2 Grape Shots. Okay.
2 Grape Shots in hand, enough to do it there. If it was 1 Grape Shot followed by flashback Past in Flames for the second one, that would not have been a winning line against what Branko had going on there. But Jari Rensch able to pull it off in spite of a little bit of disruption from the Jeskai control list, and we're going to get a chance to see the entirety of their deciding game. Now, I know that you've played quite a bit of Storm over the years, Simon. Are there some key things to keep in mind for Storm players looking to defeat control?
Yes, absolutely. So, a few things. First of all, you don't have to cast your mana creatures on turn 2 or 3. You can play them when you're ready to go off. And then you have this pretty amazing way of winning where you play a mana creature. If it resolves, you lead with a ritual or a mana morphos, usually a ritual. And because you have untapped lands available, if there comes a path, a lightning helix, a lightning bolt, whatever it is, you just continue with instants. So it's almost like a counter war, but your sack is going to be rituals. And if the control deck has less answers to your mana creature than you have rituals or gifts, then you actually get most of the benefit of the mana creature, even though it dies at the end of all these instants having been cast.
Now, one of the things about Storm, typically speaking, it's trying to get a lot of spells cast in one turn for the Storm mechanic itself. If a control deck launches into some kind of a counter war with it, it is adding to the Storm count, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
So there are some Storm cards that require more of a critical mass than others, and I see that in Yari's sideboard, not unusually it must be said, he has a copy of Empty the Warrens. Is that the kind of card that we might expect to see more of after sideboarding for this Storm list?
So I'm going to be completely honest. I'm not a big fan of Empty the Warrens, but I understand that you need it in some matchups because you just can't win. One of the things that the Storm sideboard is built against is to be able to beat Graveyard Hate. So you want to be able to beat Surgical Extractions and Rest in Peace. Now, Branko doesn't play Rest in Peace because he's a Jeskai control deck. This is different from the blue-white control decks that usually have Rest in Peace. So this means Yari is actually a lot more flexible in what he really wants to bring in and what he wants to not bring in. He can bring in one or two Empty the Warrens to basically keep Branko honest, to force Branko to have access to those Wrath of Gods even after sideboarding. But in my experience, it's actually better to not bring them in because Branko has to respect them anyway. And if you go for this quick Empty the Warrens, you might just lose to a Detention Sphere or a Wrath effect. But what's really key is the use of Grape Shot. This is the other thing that I wanted to mention. We actually saw it in this game that just finished. If you have the Storm count sufficiently high, and that can be your own spells, that can be a counter war, anything we just discussed, then you have this opportunity to Grape Shot, all the triggers on the stack target you, then the second Grape Shot from the hand also targeting you. And the key part of this is that Surgical Extraction doesn't have time to interrupt that sequence. Because Grape Shot is on the stack, then all the Storm copies resolve, the final original copy resolves, goes to the graveyard, but you're the active player and you immediately Grape Shot for the win.
Interesting. That's a very sort of narrow window of time, but a very important window of time when it comes to defeating the hate. And that's the kind of thing that if you were playing on Magic Online, it kind of naturally deals with for you, but very, very useful to know for real life Magic, because sometimes it can work out that people can get a little bit trigger happy with the likes of their Surgical Extractions. Important to understand how priority works in those cases. So thanks for that, Simon. Looks like we've got a mulligan here from the Storm player. Jari Rensch finished top of the Swiss. Branko Nerink, though, he had a little bit of a sweat waiting to see whether or not he was going to make it in. It was between him and Ivan Floch for who would be coming in eighth. The two guys, they had their arms over each other's shoulders just waiting for the result, and it was very important to both of them, of course. Only one could make it in. Part of the reason it's so important to Branko is that, in principle, his position, he could get onto the World Magic Cup team again if he's able to do well enough in this top 8. There's still the potential for him to become the Belgian national champion. He's been there before. He would love to be there again.
Yeah. And commiserations to Ivan Floch. He was fighting for platinum level. He needed a 13-2 record or a top 8. He finished 12-2-1, 9th on tiebreakers.
Wow, about as close as it comes. Sadly, I mean, I guess that this is always the case when it comes to the end of the season. For every person that is on a massive high for having managed to get there, there's got to be someone else that's losing out. And we saw that while there has been this fantastic story over the course of the weekend of Luis Salvato, in this case locking up the playoff with Seth Manfield for Player of the Year, at the same time this weekend, Reed Duke travelled across the Atlantic as well. He was in a very similar position to Luis Salvato in terms of the dream that he was chasing. Ultimately, he wasn't able to make day 2, and so he's been checking out Sweden before heading back to console himself with his spot on the World Championships next week. So scry to the top for Jari Rensch. He kicks things off with Serum Visions here.
Oh, nice scry technique.
I like that.
Well, it's a bit risky, right? If it doesn't work out, you reveal the top of your library to your deck. But it has style. I don't think I've ever seen that.
I've literally never seen that. So basically that was the two cards kind of lent against the deck itself, so he could look at them while also looking at the rest of his hand. I mean, technically not required, but looked cool. I'm down with it.
Powerful magic.
Sometimes the style points matter.
Most of the times.
All right, so Branko here, he's on Jeskai control, and we've spoken a little bit about how Storm wins against control. What is Branko going to be looking to do here in order to be able to hold off what Storm's got going on?
So I think the best thing that he can do is actually apply pressure. So just get a few attacks in, maybe be in a position where you can drop something threatening without being dead to Storm combo in response. Even just aggressive use of Snapcaster Mages, if you have an Opt or a Lightning Bolt in the graveyard, just go for it, start attacking. Putting pressure is the best way that you can prevent these insane turns from Storm. If they have 10 turns to craft the perfect 7-card hand, 8-card hand, you're not going to have a good time.
So a Manamorphose early here. Manamorphose, a card that while you're going off can potentially do all sorts of crazy things. If you get to reduce its cost, then it counts as kind of being a ritual while being a card drawing effect. But in the early stage of the game, it's also just a nice, easy, free bit of cycling and maybe even mana fixing. Cast Manamorphose, then get to cast Sleight of Hand here. So Sleight of Hand, you look at the top two, get to put one in your hand, keep things going just a little bit further. Yeah,
and in this particular scenario, Manamorphose is one of the best cards in the Storm deck, period. But if you cast it on turn 2 in this kind of spot, it signals that you're looking for lands.
And in each case, Jari Rensch here having a good little think about exactly what he wants to be doing. Remember that Rensch was on a mulligan to 6 here, so that does mean that he's working with slightly fewer resources than might be ideal. Meanwhile, at least for now, Branko content to sit on his heels, just make sure that he's got mana up to be able to meaningfully interact once Jari starts doing more. Aggressive use of these Manamorphoses is that seems to me like a signal of weakness potentially from this Storm list.
Absolutely,
right now.
Absolutely. He knows that he can win a long game, but only if he stays approximately even in the land development. So running out this Manamorphosis is something you would only do because you're pressured with your own mana development.
And we can see there that Branko smelt blood in the water. He used a Logic Knot pretty aggressively, it must be said, to counter that Manamorphose. Successfully did so, and no more land for Jari Rensch. This could be an inauspicious end to his top 8 if he's not able to draw out of it relatively quickly.
It's actually quite rare for the Storm deck to stumble on mana because of the amount of card filtering, card selection that happens. Even if you have a single land in your opening hand, Serum Vision, Sleight of Hand, Opt, and Manamorphose, all these cards dig towards more lands if you need them.
As things stand, though, occasionally these plans, they do go wrong. Branko Nerink, he's the one that's hitting his land drops. Meanwhile, on the other side of things, Jari Rensch here, I mean, he's still got more 1-mana cantrips, cards that replace themselves, as one might hope, because that's essentially a large proportion of what the Storm deck is. But, oof, Cryptic Command, I presume that this is aiming to bounce a land here.
Bounce draw.
Jari opts in response. And that a Baral Chief Compliance pickup. And goes for a Lightning Bolt just to the head.
I think that's so that he doesn't have to discard.
What a rough position here for Rensch.
Land to Fairy.
Oof.
I don't think Branko has that, but that's exactly the kind of position, of course, you want to be in as the control deck. Suddenly, Jari is completely outclassed.
Yeah, and it's the sort of thing that at this point, is this the time for Wrench to maybe take a few more risks? Hope that he's going to be able to get away with something. I mean, normally you wouldn't want to be playing Baral on this turn because it is completely exposed to whatever Branko wants to throw at it.
Yeah, but this is exactly it. Also, he has a second copy in hand, so he knows that running one out there is in his favor. Also, Path to Exile, of course, something that he would be happy to see with how the game has been going.
So Baral dealt with Snapcaster Mage, Logic Knot was enough to stop that one, and the Snapcaster Mage now even gets to start attacking. Some cheeky pokes in there from the Tiago Chan Invitational card.
Branko holding off on the Surgical Extraction, not going for Baral this time.
I mean, if you, as a Storm player, had to pick out cards that were key targets, I mean, obviously Grape Shot is one of the big win conditions, but often there's not a good time to actually snag one of them. What would you be looking to get with the Surgical Extraction?
Grape Shot, Past in Flames, sometimes even Gifts Ungiven.
Mm-hmm.
After sideboarding, it's a bit different. Yari, I think, brings in pieces of the puzzle, so you don't actually have the chance to get rid of those. But in this particular case, I think I would have just gone for the Baral.
Branko here continuing his assault on Yari Wrench's life total. Wrench, he's only got 3 lands in play. Branko with a full 7 at this point. This could be a rout. By which I mean, of course, Branko winning, not literally the card route. That was printed Invasion. As such, a little bit too early for use in Modern.
That's a 5 mana Wrath that is, you can cast at instant speed if you spend 7.
Correct. Yari here just desperately hoping to be able to string something together. Goes for a Poetic Ritual.
Okay. So it would be really interesting to see what Branko is holding. We know about the Surgical Extraction. There are some counters in his hand for sure. But also Snapcaster Mage, that's huge.
So it goes for a negate here on the Pyretic Ritual, even though in principle he could have waited a little bit longer. Presumably there's a little bit of a concern of storm cards that you don't want to let them storm up and then not be able to counter the key spell.
Yep. Especially with the threat of Empty the Warrens.
So a very small Grape Shot there. It kills off Snapcaster Mage, does a couple of points to Branko as well, thanks to the 2 spells cast before it.
And suddenly Branko is almost out of cards here. He's holding on to this 1 Snapcaster Mage Cryptic Command, but he doesn't have much to interact with what Yari is doing.
Now we see the Surgical Extraction. So the life totals all of a sudden even Stevens. But
Bam.
Wow, that is the kind of response that you really don't want to see if you're casting your big Phyrexian mana spell. The Phyrexian mana spell on the other side of things, Noxious Revival, it lets you put a card from your graveyard on top of the deck, and it forces Branko to use his Snapcaster Mage in order to find some counter magic, just so that he can make sure this Surgical Extraction does what it needs to. And 2 copies of Grape Shot now being removed. Are there more in the deck? We'll find out soon enough, because Branko is going to get to have a look through, find exactly how that sideboarding has gone. And without Grape Shot, Yari Wrench, I mean, the old-fashioned way is not going to be very exciting here. If he's not got Empty the Warrens to work with, then he might find himself with an incredible amount of work to do.
Yeah, if he doesn't have Empty the Warrens against Jeskai control, your creatures are not going to get there. You're not going to win with beatdown of Baral and Goblin Electromancer.
Nerink, he gets to have a good old look through, make sure that he fully understands what's going on, not just in terms of how many more Grape Shots there might be. I know that there are 3 in the main deck. Also, how has the sideboarding gone? Exactly what other bits and pieces might Yari be working with? Also, he can see that there's pieces of the puzzle and a ritual in hand for Yari.
And I believe that Yari intentionally exposed the Grape Shot, knowing about the risk, but Noxious Revival was his trump card. Problem was that Nerink had that extra counter.
So Wrench, it's only going to take 4 turns for him to get killed off here by Snapcaster Mage, and one of his key ways of killing creatures, that Grape Shot, already gone away. Well, there were 3 blue-white control lists and 1 Jeskai control list that made it into the top 8. 2 of the blue-white control lists have fallen, but it may be that Jeskai gets to fly the flag for control in the semi-finals here. Nehrink with just a crazy amount of lands in play compared to his opponent. And secure the wastes, generating a much, much faster clock for Branko Nehrink. This looks like it could be over very, very quickly indeed. 6, 7 soldiers, in fact, coming down here, leveraging all of that land advantage that was going on there. So warrior tokens, not soldiers. And meanwhile, on the other side of things, pieces of that puzzle, I mean, none of those pieces look like they're going to be good enough here, Simon.
Heads up play by Branko, because if Jari takes a negate here, suddenly he can't resolve secure the wastes, doesn't have lethal on the board anymore, and here Jari has to take Lightning Bolt just to stay alive.
And even that staying alive is kind of treading water, really, because it's not as if it's putting him in a winning position, it just buys him an extra turn. Serum Visions, 1 on top, 1 on the bottom. There's the Lightning Bolt on Snapcaster Mage, but Branko here, he untaps. His turn pretty much laid out. Attacks in for 7. Jari Wrench on just a single point of life here. 11 on the other side of things for Branko Nehrink. What can it be?
Jari left the card on top. So Branko now decides to Field of Ruin so that the card that Jari would have drawn is not on top of the deck anymore. Easy to forget about when you think you are so safe that you're very likely just winning here, but who knows? Maybe it was the pieces of the puzzle that could have enabled an insane Empty the Ruins.
Nehrink, one of the best players in Belgium, if not the best, and if he can string together a great finish at this GP, he could still be the Belgian national champion. There was a lot of excitement when he got announced in 8th place in the top 8 here in Stockholm, Sweden.
Pieces of the puzzle.
All right. What do we have? I mean, this is a lot of digging, but not a lot of treasure being revealed by Jari Wrench off this. And with 7 copies of that warrior token to deal with on 1 life, he needs blockers for all of them. This seems like a big ask at this point.
No, Jari needed a ritual and an Empty the Ruins in that pile. I assume that he is Empty the Ruins in the deck, because otherwise I don't even think he would still be playing. 1 ritual in hand, so had the Empty the Ruins been there, we would have had a game.
Wrench just making sure. But there's the handshake. A little smile from Branko Nehrink. He will be advancing to the semi-finals, and that means that all of our quarterfinals now complete. Let's do the quick rundown, Simon, of exactly how our quarterfinals went. We started things off with the big match to potentially determine Player of the Year. It was Ondrej Strazky versus Luis Salvato. There, Strazky triumphed. That means that Strazky advancing to the semi-finals. Luis Salvato, well, he'll be heading across the World Championships. He'll be heading into a playoff for Player of the Year at some point in the future. Good finish for him. Strazky advances. Oliver Moon, he also on Bant Spirits was able to defeat Elias Clocker on Marta. That means that we're going to have a Bant Spirits mirror on the bottom half of our bracket. On the other side of things, Jol Larsson against Rasmus Enegren. We didn't get to see it, but it was a blue-white mirror where the more experienced Swede ultimately took the victory there. So it'll be Jol Larsson on blue-white control. And then finally, we just saw him, the Belgian player who snuck in at 8th place, Branko Nehrink. He will be up against Jol Larsson. So we've got a Spirits mirror and a control pseudo mirror, one of them Jeskai, one of them blue-white. As we advance through to our semi-finals. Fantastic stuff in that quarterfinal, Simon.
Absolutely. Great magic.
Well played. And certainly one of the things that I was kind of surprised by was just how powerful these Spirits decks can appear to be. We'll get a chance to find out which of our 2 players on Spirits will be making it to the finals, because I can tell you right now, it will be Spirits, it will be Control in the finals. It's just a matter of the details, and all of those details will come to you with Riley and Raf after these messages.